My beloved, do you think it's an accident that you're hearing my voice right now? No. Heaven planned this moment long before you took your first breath. Here on Holy Voices, we share the whispers of eternity, the messages that change hearts and awaken destinies. If your soul is ready, stay with me, because what you're about to hear might be the very word your spirit has been waiting for. Every seed carries a future. Your $20, $50, or $100 gift through Super Thanks into Holy Voices is a future blessing waiting to unfold. When the lights turn on, someone's house of cards has just fallen apart, and they're scurrying around like roaches. There's a manipulator in your circle who has been operating the most complex scam you have ever seen, and their time is up as spiritual warfare rages around the earth right now. The masks are dropping. The lies are coming undone. And what I'm going to tell you will demonstrate just how close you were to being spiritually assassinated by someone who sharpened knives behind your back while grinning in your face. This twist, however, is going to completely upend your understanding. They didn't only take advantage of you. They launched a concerted spiritual assault on you with the express goal of stealing your authority, corrupting your mission, and using your own gifts against you. Experts in psychological warfare are aware that forcing a powerful individual to destroy themselves is the most efficient approach to bring them down. And that's precisely what this manipulator has been doing, with the dexterity of a skilled puppeteer plucking invisible threads. They're in complete panic mode right now because their entire organization is collapsing more quickly than they can contain the damage. By making frantic phone calls and attempting to purchase silence with threats and promises, they are essentially pleading with others to keep secrets. While all of its captured prey suddenly develop wings, picture a spider watching its web dissolve in the rain. Their reality is collapsing around them like that. And you're the hurricane they didn't anticipate. The person who persuaded you to doubt your own instincts is now doubting all they believed they understood about manipulating you. When karma starts to accumulate, the person who made you feel accountable for their mess is going to learn what true chaos looks like. The manipulator who used your sympathy as a weapon is going to discover that all swords are bidirectional and that the blade is rotating in their grasp. It's not just one liar being exposed in what follows. It's about taking back power that you were unaware had been taken from you. Reaching a level of spiritual authority that will make your prior self seem like a warm-up act and recognizing patterns you were taught to disregard. Their desperate attempt to hide their secrets is about to become your key to discovering facts that will change your perception of them as well as of yourself and everyone else. Being compassionate, patient, and adaptable with someone who mistakenly believes that you are spiritually naive is the first step in this process. They witnessed you going above and beyond, putting up with rudeness, and offering justifications for actions that would have made others flee. However, what they perceived as weakness was actually you operating at such a high frequency that you offered them opportunities they never merited, forgiveness they didn't deserve, and mercy they would never receive again. Like a scientist examining laboratory specimens, they examined your reactions. They made mental notes each time you demonstrated empathy rather than condemnation. They store it up as leverage for later use every time you put love before ego. On every occasion, you put peace above right. They listed it as proof that you may be controlled forever. However, those that are chosen do not remain naive forever. And eventually, their ploy would be exposed by your spiritual awakening. You would soon be able to tell the difference between someone who is hiding and someone who is mending thanks to the same supernatural discernment that allowed you to sense possibility in broken individuals. In the end, the same innate abilities that enabled you to comprehend their suffering will expose the calculating aspect of their performance. This is when things start to get interesting. Because what you believed to be personal drama between you and one unstable person was actually a well-planned campaign with several participants, each with a specific role and a screenplay meant to push you to the limit. They were busy assembling a flying monkey army to carry out a psychological warfare operation that would wow military strategists, while you were trying to love them into completeness. That person wasn't telepathic. They always seemed to know your business before you did. They received a briefing. The relative wasn't worried when they started inquiring about your relationships out of the blue. They were gathering intelligence. The friend who started to appear wherever you used to find tranquility wasn't there by accident. They were positioned strategically. Every casual discussion, innocent question, and chance meeting was a component of a monitoring system intended to track, control, and eventually eliminate your influence. However, in their complex plan, they made a mistake. They thought you were foolish because you were so friendly. You were weak because of your compassion, and you were naive because of your spiritual gifts. Underestimating just who they were dealing with was the cornerstone of their entire operation. You were living on a chessboard of heavenly strategy that they couldn't even see while they were using human manipulation techniques to play checkers. The manipulation was more than just gaslighting and lying. They were making every effort to keep you away from anyone who might be familiar with their game, methodically undermining connections that endangered their authority over your world. They positioned themselves as your only trustworthy source of truth in a world they portrayed as being full of people who didn't understand you, sowed doubts about those who truly loved you, and fabricated disputes with allies who were able to see through their facade. This is where the spiritual conflict becomes very evil, though. They were acting on more than simply human psychology. Most individuals aren't prepared to identify or counteract the supernatural forces at work. This individual had been experimenting with methods that circumvent your conscious defenses by manipulating your energy field, influencing your dreams, and forming strange attachments. The incessant ideas about them that appear out of thin air. The inexplicable feelings that drew you to someone you knew was poisonous. How every interaction, even the good ones, left you feeling exhausted. That was no accident. They had been utilizing techniques that go beyond traditional manipulation into areas of spiritual binding and psychic interference, working with forces that are darker than most people wish to admit exist. You weren't emotionally unstable, which is why you were so perplexed by how you felt about them. It was because activities that produce phony spiritual connections and contrived attractions were manipulating your natural emotional responses. This explains why, even though you knew they were bad for your health, it felt nearly difficult to leave them. This explains why you had such a strong internal struggle between what your emotions seemed to be saying you and what your spirit knew to be true. In essence, they had taken control of your spiritual circuitry and redirected it to suit their needs, resulting in an energetic reliance that was the exact opposite of a true soul connection. Every private discussion you had with them was turned into information that was shared with their network. Every moment of vulnerability you went through was used as fuel for attacks in the future. They would steal every nugget of knowledge you shared and pass it off to other victims as their own. They weren't merely stealing your confidence. They were using your soul as a resource for their continuous campaigns of spiritual warfare. The way they turned your own principles against you was the most pernicious aspect. They continued to portray themselves as deserving of salvation because they knew you believed in redemption. They made you feel bad for questioning their inconsistent actions since they knew you valued loyalty. They kept hinting at the promise of who they might become, but never really being it, since they understood your talent for spotting people's potential. Aspects of the operation were delegated to several individuals behind the scenes. Some were assigned to manipulate your emotions by giving you just enough affirmation to keep you invested and depriving you of enough to keep you feeling insecure. Others were experts at causing mayhem in your surroundings, fabricating issues that would sap your vitality and divert your attention from their well-planned nature. Others concentrated on reputation assassination, telling everyone who would listen well-constructed stories about your character. Their operation's money element was especially pernicious. They had been methodically trying to undermine your financial base, either by directly undermining your chances or by establishing fictitious dependencies that would leave you exposed. They realized that spiritual individuals who are financially independent are far more difficult to manage than those who are having difficulty meeting their basic requirements. Some of you learned that they had been meddling in your business dealings, quietly damaging your standing with supervisors, clients, or coworkers. They would methodically undermine the respect and trust you had earned in your profession by telling stories that were plausible by combining cleverly constructed lies with just enough truth. It wasn't simply about hurting your earnings. It was done to put you in a position where you would have to rely on them to survive, which would make it much harder to escape their influence even if you knew it was toxic. Nor was the timing of their attacks arbitrary. They happened when you were most vulnerable, at significant life changes, when you were having a spiritual awakening, or when your influence was growing too much for them to handle. They were aware that spiritually endowed individuals are more vulnerable to deception during periods of transition, growth, or uncertainty because doubt may most easily pass for knowledge during these times. However, all manipulators eventually commit the same deadly error. They overplay their hand, become arrogant, and show more of who they really are than they meant to. Because they felt their psychological conditioning had permanently damaged your ability to see properly, the individual who had been so careful to keep their mask on began to become careless. Heaven records every act of faith. Even your $20 click on Super Thanks and Holy Voices is written in eternity. They believed they had successfully taught you to accept their interpretation of reality, question your own senses, and hold yourself responsible for the issues they were causing. Your spiritual discernment went into overdrive at that point. Your instincts began to make connections you never would have thought possible. Patterns that they believed they had hidden started to show. It became impossible to overlook the contradictions in their stories. With a startling clarity that sliced through their deceit like a blade through silk, the very gifts they had been attempting to nullify came into play. Like storms following pressure systems, you began to notice how issues followed their influence. When they gave counsel regarding them, relationships grew complex. When they became interested in projects, they were derailed. When they demanded your attention, your tranquility vanished. When they expressed their opinions regarding your decisions, your confidence faltered. They had told you that life was hard, but in reality, everything was reacting to their poisonous presence in your energy field. It was not a slow or peaceful awakening. It struck like if the darkness were being divided by lightning. Suddenly, you could see the roles other individuals had been given in their intricate show, the strings they had been pulling, and the scripts they had been following. The person you believed you were assisting turned out to be the puppet master who had been directing your bewilderment, insecurity, and emotional weariness. It was a freeing and tragic moment of recognition. Conversations you believed to be private turned out to be public intelligence disseminated throughout their network, you realized. Your disclosed personal issues were turned into tools that could be used against you in the future. To keep you off balance and reliant on their version of reality, they had compiled, examined, and carefully used personal information about you, your family, your anxieties, your dreams, and your past traumas. The most startling revelation was that they had been taking advantage of your spiritual abilities. You had been forced to disregard people's real conduct by using your capacity to sense their potential as a weapon. Someone had taken advantage of your ability to forgive in order to get you to overlook the unacceptable. In order to control your compassion, your innate need to help others had been perverted into a need to fix someone who was purposefully hurting themselves. By observing your energy patterns, they were able to determine when you were most susceptible to manipulation and which triggers would elicit the desired reactions from you. In order to keep you emotionally connected, they knew just how to act, what to say to make you question your perspectives, and which buttons to press to make you feel accountable for their issues and compelled to find solutions. As you awoke, the financial manipulation became abundantly evident. You began to make connections between the occurrence of financial difficulties in your life and what had previously appeared to be bad luck. Their fingerprints were frequently found on opportunities that unexpectedly failed. Their rising demands on your time and efforts were accompanied by resources that vanished often. They had been deliberately undermining your financial security in order to make you dependent and deny you the freedom that comes with owning money. However, this is when their scheme went horribly wrong. The discovery of their dishonesty sparked something inside of you that they could never have predicted, rather than shattering you. Out of the ashes of their psychological assault, your spiritual fight arose. Furthermore, this iteration of yourself had no interest in recognizing their trauma, defending their actions, or providing them with additional opportunities to show their humanity. One thing was the main emphasis of this version of you: comprehensive energy protection and freedom from their effect. They had been spiritual vampires, feasting on your light. All of a sudden, their food source was actively discouraging them rather than being unavailable. Everyone in their vicinity was made aware of their actual nature by a force field created from the same energy they had been using for their personal ends. They looked just what they were: desperate, cunning, and spiritually bankrupt, without your light to shine. This is when divine justice becomes very fulfilling. Their attempts to substitute alternative supply sources for you failed miserably. The new individuals they attempted to control weren't on your wavelength. They lacked your wisdom, your spiritual maturity, and your courage to see the possibilities in broken people. This manipulator instantly ran into opposition while attempting to use the same playbook on their substitute targets. These new victims weren't selected after years of compassion training and spiritual growth. They were ordinary individuals with typical limits who didn't justify rude behavior, who walked away from toxic situations without turning around, and who called out manipulation when they saw it. The manipulator had to deal with individuals who were intolerant of their emotional terrorism, uninterested in their trauma dumping, and impatient with their sob stories. Observe what occurs when a skilled manipulator is forced to function without the spiritual protection that your light offered. Since they were no longer surrounded by someone whose energy made them seem more evolved than they actually were, their mask began to come off right away. The disparity becomes sharp and indisputable. They have been using your spiritual power as justification for their destructive actions. And without that disguise, everyone could see their actual nature. Under strain, the familial dynamics they had been concealing also began to break down. The generational patterns they were unwilling to alter started to show up in ways that were impossible to hide or justify. In public settings where their reputation was important, the same poisonous tendencies that had run in their family began to show. The truth was writing itself into every interaction they had, and they were no longer in control of the story. Because you stopped responding to their provocations, participating in their drama, and supplying the emotional responses that bolstered their sense of power, the network they had established to keep an eye on and manipulate you abruptly had nothing to report. Their flying monkeys ended up transporting stories to someone who had transcended their perception of reality and delivering messages to someone who no longer cared about their opinions. At this point, their true panic began. Because manipulators can only control those who want to be validated, approved, loved, paid attention to, or even just at peace. Their whole toolkit of manipulative techniques was rendered ineffective the instant you lost interest in anything they had to offer. They were generals in charge of an army in a conflict in which the adversary had just left the battlefield. No one, not even you, anticipated the moment of truth, which came like a tsunami of discovery. Someone in their inner circle concluded that keeping their secrets was riskier than disclosing them due to remorse, self-preservation, and divine intervention. The dam broke. Everything they had fought so hard to conceal was revealed in a deluge of truth when they were chosen, submerging their entire plan. Picture this situation. There's a frenzied flurry of phone calls. As their meticulously crafted line matrix began to fall apart more quickly than they could create fresh stories to limit the harm, messages began to fly across digital networks and emergency meetings were called. They were suddenly questioning commands, comparing notes, and recognizing they had been played just as brilliantly as you had. These were the same people who had been devoted troops in their army against you. The poetic quality of divine justice can be seen in this exquisite irony. Their allies turned against them because of the same deception techniques they employed against you. People had the same awakening you did when they realized they had been misled about their involvement in the conspiracy, giving conflicting accounts of the same events, and used as pawns in a game they didn't fully comprehend. Their sense of betrayal was similar to yours, but now they were able to see their manipulators' genuine selves without the protective mask that had been put on for you. There was more to the exposure than merely the discovery of lies. It was about their dishonesty's methodical character coming to light. Evidence of talks that were not supposed to be seen was seen by people. Found that material that ought to have remained confidential had been disclosed. Became aware that they had been coerced into speaking and acting in ways that suited the goals of others rather than their own principles or interests. As the truth became apparent, the legal ramifications of their actions began to emerge. Some of their actions had strayed into areas where there could be major repercussions, going beyond straightforward social manipulation. The financial sabotage you endured left behind documentation. They planned the damage to their reputation, which produced proof of intentional slander. Without your consent, they had been engaging in spiritual activities that amounted to assault, a crime that most legal systems are ill-prepared to handle. Spiritual law, however, never ignores. Records surfaced that demonstrated their campaign against you was planned in advance. Screenshots of their chats with their assistants in which they arranged stories. Financial documents attesting to the fact that they profited from opportunities they stole from you. Proof of the paranormal techniques they had been using to alter your energy field and form fictitious bonds. Even they had lost sight of all the moving components since their operation was so vast. Malachi 3 verse 10 says, "Test me in this, says the Lord, and see if I will not throw open the floodgates of heaven." Test God today with a $100 seed into Holy Voices. The fact that they had chronicled their own misdeeds was the most incriminating proof. In their conceit, they had documented their methods of manipulation, discussed their spiritual assaults in group chats, and even filmed discussions in which they talked about how to keep you deceived and reliant. The very proof that would reveal their helplessness in the face of reality was their need to brag about their dominance over you. As the extent of their network became apparent, several jurisdictions expressed interest in their operations. What began as personal turmoil turned out to be a pattern of behavior that had impacted many victims in various places. Trained practitioners were able to recognize and track down the energetic signs left by the spiritual combat they believed to be unseen. It was never intended for you to travel this route by yourself. There is more to the Holy Voice's inner order than meets the eye. It is a haven for the awakened, the exiled, and those who have been abandoned for their truth and gaslighted for their abilities. We get together live on Zoom once a week. Stories of transformation from real individuals with genuine faces. A healer who overcame ritual abuse and discovered their power, a former CFO who accepted their psychic skills, and a seer who liberated themselves from religious oppression. We're joined by dozens of others who have been through exactly what you have. Your spiritual family is this group. I will never abandon you. I will never allow you to experience this enlightenment by yourself. I will never ignore your pain as if it were a sign of disdain. You were not punished by being banished from the normal world. For us in the family that chooses you back, it was a prelude to this. Join the inner order of Holy Voices. In the description, there is a link. Their operation's spiritual component also became apparent. What had initially appeared to be personal drama turned out to be a concerted spiritual campaign intended to deprive you of your authority, taint your mission, and use your own talents against you. Their attacks timing, the accuracy of a level of calculating that transcended human psychology and entered areas of spiritual darkness that most people would rather not recognize was revealed by their strategic isolation methods and emotional manipulation. When they understood that being exposed would do more than simply make them seem bad, their desperation reached a breaking point. The whole phony identity they had created was going to be destroyed. When the truth was revealed, the person that individuals believed they were would no longer exist. Since everything they had constructed had been based on lies that were now being methodically demolished, their reputation, relationships, and influence were all on the verge of dissolving. At this point, they began pleading with others to remain silent, offering anything from direct bribes to emotional blackmail in an effort to preserve the conspiracy of silence that had long shielded them. They played the victim, threatened repercussions, made promises of change, and even attempted to persuade others that disclosing the truth would in some way harm innocent people. However, those who have chosen to embrace the truth are immune to lies. Their web of deceit was disintegrating as quickly as their network of helpers. If it weren't so pitiful, the desperation would have been hilarious. In an attempt to influence narratives about incidents from the distant past, they began contacting people they hadn't spoken to in years. They sent well-crafted sob stories to mutual pals in an attempt to elicit compassion and keep more information from leaking. They even tried offering money, favors, or emotional reunion to erstwhile allies in an effort to buy their silence. In the middle of the night, they made a few panic calls. Frantic efforts to awaken people and persuade them that, in some way, keeping secrets was the right thing to do. Claiming that publicity would ruin their lives, damage their reputations, and harm their family members who had nothing to do with their decisions, they portrayed themselves as the true victim. They failed to see the irony that, while actively trying to ruin your tranquility, reputation, and well-being, they were pleading for the same mercy they had never shown you. They began making promises to put things right, including paying back the money they had stolen from you, fixing the falsehoods they had propagated, and promising to never speak to you again if people would stop being honest about their actions. But selected one. Crimes aren't worth revealing, and secrets aren't worth preserving when someone has to plead with others to keep them that way. The fact that you didn't have to do anything to make this happen is its most lovely aspect. You didn't need to confront them, expose them, or even consider them. The universe itself started planning their demise the instant you separated your energy from their disarray and began acting from your true power. Truth moves on its own. And maintaining lies takes ongoing effort. You stopped feeding their system, so they had no more energy available. Your universe grew in ways that transcended every constraint they had attempted to place on your reality, while theirs collapsed in dramatic fashion. You were surrounded by real connections that respected your true nature, while they rushed to save ties with individuals who suddenly saw them plainly. With their reputation in tatters, they found it difficult to remain credible, but your integrity stood out more than ever in contrast to their blatant dishonesty. The individual who had attempted to undermine your self-esteem was now doubting every aspect of themselves. It was the real isolation that comes from being exposed as spiritually bankrupt that the person who had tried to separate you from your power was now feeling. Now, the manipulator who had put so much effort into snuffing out your light was sitting in the shadow of the repercussions they had brought about for themselves. Here's what gives this its potency, though. Your triumph did not turn you into a vengeful or hateful person. You didn't celebrate their failure or dance on their grave. Rather, you were the very thing they had attempted to destroy. Power without retaliation, grace under duress, and might without violence. Your reaction to their spiritual assault turned into a master lecture in how those who are in alignment with God deal with resistance. You were able to focus on your true goal instead of wasting energy attempting to make sense of their discrepancies. You were able to create the life you were supposed to live with the emotional bandwidth you had been using to handle their upheaval. The difficulties they had put you through increased and cleansed the spiritual abilities they had attempted to ruin. You developed razor-sharp discernment that allowed you to spot manipulative techniques before they had a chance to establish themselves. With the authority of someone who has understood the price of misplaced trust, your boundaries were unbreakable, keeping you at peace. Your intuition developed into a well-honed tool that could confidently and clearly traverse challenging spiritual terrain. The others who had been enlisted in their effort to harm you started contacting you with petitions for forgiveness, explanations, and apologies. Some of them sincerely regretted their involvement in what they now understood to be spiritual abuse. Others were merely attempting to gain favor with someone they now understood to be in a position of actual authority. The way you handled every circumstance showed how wise you had become during the whole experience. Most significantly, you realized that your spiritual path had not been diverted in any way by this entire event. It had played a crucial role in it. You learned about the intricate nature of contemporary spiritual warfare via the manipulation you experienced. You were able to help others identify similar attacks on their own life because of the deception you experienced. Comfort could never have brought you closer to your divine source than the solitude you endured. The one who went through this trial was not the same as the one who came out. And the true triumph was that change. Only your strongest, most genuine self was left after you had been honed by persecution, tested under duress, and forged in fire. They thought the caring individual was weak, yet she turned into an unbeatable spiritual warrior. The sympathetic individual they had used developed a keen awareness of how to defend others and themselves from such assaults. Recall how this started. You were the one who demonstrated tolerance, understanding, and flexibility to someone who mistakenly believed that you were weak. The individual taking in these remarks now realizes that unbridled flexibility is not wisdom. It's spirituality masquerading as self-destruction. Although the understanding you demonstrated to them was genuine, it was never intended to be self-serving or biased. Your patience was appreciated, but it was never meant to be unrestricted or limitless. You came into this scenario as someone who went above and above for other people to the point where you almost broke yourself. You come out of it as a person whose love is guarded by wisdom, whose compassion is protected by discernment, and whose light is protected by boundaries that respect your tranquility and your purpose. The adaptability that made you vulnerable to manipulation has been changed to one that works best for you. You are now immune to comparable attacks because of the same spiritual gifts that rendered you vulnerable to their psychological warfare. Though it's now tempered by the ability to view reality as it is, rather than how you want it could be, your capacity to sense potential in others remains intact. Your ability to empathize with others' suffering is still strong. However, it no longer means putting your own needs and well-being last. In the end, the light that you bear could not be touched by the generational curses they held, the poisonous habits they refused to break, or the spiritual darkness they chose to embrace. God gives seed to the sower, 2 Corinthians 9 verse 10. Your seed through super thanks, whether $20, $50, or $100, will not return empty. Sow it into holy voices and watch it multiply. Because they are unable to access, corrupt, or extinguish the source of that light. Their attempts to bring you down to their level simply serve to highlight how much higher you naturally operate than they do. You now serve as living evidence that human manipulation techniques, no matter how intricate or well-planned, cannot permanently derail the chosen ones. You show that individuals acting with a damaged ego and demonic influence cannot spiritually assassinate those who are genuinely connected to the divine source. You are a living example of the fact that when darkness stops apologizing for being bright, light will always triumph. The huge secret of the immature liar has now been revealed. What was discovered about your own strength, however, is the most significant revelation. They made an effort to persuade you that you were too demanding of honesty and respect, too spiritual, too deep, and too much. In actuality, you were far too much for those who merely wished to take advantage of your energy and just enough for those who earned access to it. Their frantic efforts to conceal their secrets only served to increase their visibility. Because justice has its own momentum and truth has its own timetable. Each falsehood they spread about you turned into a prophecy about their own personalities. Every tactic they employed against you transformed into a weapon in their hands. Every individual they enlisted to dim your light finally realized their deceit and began to doubt their own wisdom for taking part. This is the account of your chosen victory. It's your origin narrative, but more than that. This is how you learned that your gifts are more than just skills to be shared, they are abilities to be safeguarded. You discovered that your energy is not only love to be given, but also money to be carefully invested. This is how you come to understand that your goal is to fulfill with total spiritual authority, not only to provide service. They were unable to break the individual they attempted to break. For those working in the dark, the light they attempted to dim became blinding. The trials they subjected you to increased the power they attempted to steal. You have changed since you first stepped into this spiritual battleground. And the true gem that arose from the ashes of their deceit is that change. They've lost their house of cards. They have revealed their network of lies. They have dismantled their network of manipulation. However, you, the selected one, remain upright. Not merely existing, prospering, developing, and reaching your greatest potential as the person you were always destined to be. Your heavenly identity was revealed to you as a result of their attack on your character. Your spiritual authority was activated as a result of their attempt to take your power. Their attempt to write your conclusion turned into the start of a new chapter in which you write your own tale using the pen of genuine purpose and the ink of unwavering truth. The great secret of the immature liar is revealed. And it showed something even more significant. When a divinely chosen individual quits lowering their light to make spiritually bankrupt people feel at ease with their darkness, an irresistible force develops. Beloved soul, if this message has spoken to your heart, don't let it end here. Click that like button so the light can spread to more people who need hope. Subscribe to Holy Voices so you never miss the next word heaven has for you. And leave a comment below. I read every one, and I pray over them. Remember, faith grows when we share it, so share this message with someone who needs to hear it today. Until we meet again, may God's peace cover you and His voice guide your every step.